I think at one time or the other, all of us have looked up in the sky and thought, where did this all come from? What's it all really about? And indeed, that's one of the most significant questions to all of religion and philosophy, and ultimately even science. Now, because science has come to a certain type of conclusion about where things have come from, or at least should we say mechanically how things have come about, some people have taken that to mean that we didn't really come from anything. We just sort of happened. Everything is just chance. And that's certainly possible, since none of us really know. Now, a lot of religions tend to come from the idea that somehow something up there wanted this all to happen. And to me, that's certainly a much more interesting prospect than just everything appeared. And to me, there is a middle ground there, and of course, Omnism is always looking for a middle ground. A lot of Christians have started championing this idea called intelligent design. Now, that sounds really kind of awful to a lot of people because they think it's really just a way of trying to make God sound scientific. And in many ways it actually is, but to me, intelligent design is really an interesting way of putting all of this. It's sort of looking up and seeing all of reality and everything, our entire lives, the earth and the universe, as simply having purpose, as something, some intelligence, something having planned it. And to me, that's really an interesting concept, even if most of the people who are championing that idea are simply trying to prove that their God exists, which admittedly, to a good degree, a lot of them probably are. They say there must be an intelligent designer, but they kind of want it to be their intelligent designer. But on the other hand, when you think about it, both science and religion both have the exact same problem. Let's put it as a fallacy. They have the exact same fallacy. When ultimately put up against the wall and said, okay, where does God come from? Christians say, well, he's just always existed. Which I guess is just a nice pat answer. Well, he's always been around. He's there through infinity. So who made God? Well, we don't need an answer. We don't need to go back before that. And for some people, it's a good enough of an answer. For some of us, it's not. On the other hand, science does the exact same thing, because we say, well, how did the universe start? Well, the scientists don't know. Some people, including Stephen Hawking, put forth the possibility that the universe has always existed. It's just everything goes back, and instead of going back to a point, it goes back to sort of a curve. And so the universe is simply endless. It doesn't need a beginning. It doesn't need an end. It's just endless, which ultimately comes around to the exact same thing. We don't really know. The Christians don't know where God comes from. Science doesn't know where the universe comes from. To me, I prefer to look at the world as having a purpose. Now, from one perspective, I think it either has a purpose or doesn't have a purpose, genuinely depending on how you look at it. And I think both very well might possibly be true. But I prefer to look at it as having a purpose. And to me, regardless of what you want to consider God being, and to me, as I've said on many occasions, the whole God concept is extremely wide. And this is part of why I really enjoyed getting into Judaism, because Judaism at its face seems a lot like Christianity. Their God is this very personal, somewhat simplistic God that some Christians believe in. But if you go deeper into their mystical aspects, into Kabbalah, God becomes a bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger concept, to the point that you're getting into the Ein Sof and the endless, and a much more pantheistic view of God. And you do have to keep in mind that when you get to that point, that when you are genuinely thinking of a whatever, who created the entire universe, genuinely created everything, created good and evil and gravity and physics and love and hate and everything that goes into this universe, you're also talking about a being who would also be beyond all of those things. And this is why when Christians look at God as a kind, loving God, the God more of the New Testament, shall we say, and sometimes they have difficulty correlating that with the God of the Old Testament, who's a vengeful and angry God. To me, that's not a contradiction, because God literally is probably just about anything you could put to him. And so you could look at him as good, you could look at him as evil, literally, and both those would be true. You can look at him as loving, you can look at him as vengeful. All of those concepts are essentially true of God, because God is such a huge concept that you could think of him, yes, quite literally, as the great spaghetti monster. And in some aspect, that probably is true. And this is the exact same way I look at intelligent design. Intelligent design, to me, is simply the possibility that all of this does have a purpose. Even if we're to take the Big Bang very literally, it is impossible for me, personally, to look out of this entire universe and think of all these gases that slowly, over billions of years, formed into suns and formed into planets, and then life began on a planet, and we had evolution, and that eventually became man, and now we are these people considering our own existence. And somehow consciousness grew out of this. I don't see anything accidental about that. Now, what's interesting is I think that you can go to a scientist, and if you said, okay, well, I tell you what, forget God. Let's say that there's some alien force who began the universe, something completely beyond our imagination, for whom what we call matter is just like ceramic. And they could have just as easily made the universe out of plastic or concrete, but they decided to use ceramic, which is what we call matter. And if you put that to scientists, or perhaps I should say to the modern, a certain type of atheist thinker, and said, okay, it was an alien, they could live with that. I've kind of heard some people, say that type of thing. They're okay with the idea of some kind of an alien species beginning life, but not God. And Christians, on the other hand, if you brought them the idea of an alien, they would say, oh, no, it's got to be God. Now, when you think about it, I mean, God is alien as they come, right? By his very nature, anything not of this planet is an alien. But what it really comes down to is the way Christians want to see reality, and the way many people now want to see reality. It has much more to do with what makes them feel safe. To Christians, that God that they believe in is their salvation. If that God doesn't exist, they might die and go to nothing. They might not die and go to their heaven. And scientists, or should I say the more atheist thinker, and in particular the type of atheist thinker who prefers the idea of oblivion. Oblivion for them is something that is solid, something they can believe in, something they can feel, at least I know what's going to happen. And of course, all of us in between who don't necessarily believe either one. But what it really comes down to is people needing to believe what they already believe. And to me, it's just not that simple. I don't really need either of those concrete ways of looking at it. To me, considering the universe having begun from something perhaps intelligent, perhaps something that you and I wouldn't even consider intelligent, something so far beyond intelligence that even the very idea of reason would boggle our mind, or the idea of its reason for why we are here. But one way or the other, I don't personally think that the idea of intelligent design is bad. In fact, I think it's a really intriguing concept if you take it in a much wider meaning. Obviously, many people who believe in the intelligent design idea want it to be a very particular intelligent designer, and on the scientific end, a lot of people don't want it to be anything. They like this idea of a universe that could just create itself out of nothing, regardless of how kind of absurd that sounds to me. I mean, for heaven's sake, seriously? Matter, the universe, everything just sort of poof. But one way or the other, I think it's an interesting idea. I think that looking at intelligent design in a wider scope as simply trying to discover ultimately what made the universe, what or who or how, and not necessarily needing it to be the Christian God per se, but not needing it to be nothing. I think there might be an answer in that. And hopefully, omnistic thinking can get us there. I'm the Urban Omnist. I'll see you guys later. What? And stuff. So, in closing, I'd just like to babble pointlessly about things I don't really know anything about. Someone actually created this whole thing. Personally, I think it's a complete load of bollocks. I think that we're all really spinning on a giant pizza named Harvey. And that the great anchovy in the sky. And remember guys, none of this works without you. So, subscribe to our channel, like us on Facebook and Twitter, and above all, don't forget to send me those questions.